Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of a SIGcast. This one's a little different. It does not really involve any specific historical content. However, recently an assignment was distributed, and I asked you guys to write a thesis paragraph. The one that this episode refers to is one on enlightened despots. And needless to say, we need a little bit of refresher, and just consider this as a reminder of what is expected when you write a thesis paragraph. Remember, introductory paragraphs are written the same way, whether they're a DBQ or an LEQ. An LEQ is basically a regular old essay, no documents, in which all the evidence comes straight from your head. DBQ, obviously, you can use the documents. You're going to need to use this information from this lesson when you're finally able to have an LEQ assignment, which, by the way, will be in the near future. It's really important that you kind of adopt some of the procedures that I'm about to reintroduce to you, because remember, DBQs and LEQs are timed, and you really don't get any points for writing a bunch of introductory stuff, so to speak, or fluff, or, like I graded my son's book report last night on Ulysses S. Grant, and it was like something like this. Do you know why you should learn about Ulysses S. Grant? Well, sit back and I will tell you. You don't need that stuff. Really, it's not a good idea to spend a lot of time writing all this flowery, literary, snuggly, introductory stuff that you might do in some of your other classes. Be efficient, okay? So, thesis paragraph requirements, let's remember, refresh, 3 to 5 sentences. You need a broad thesis statement and 2 to 4 sub-thesis categories, all right? And again, very important to follow this format, okay? Remember, a broad thesis statement is basically a topic sentence for the entire paper, and it addresses the prompt in such a way that someone who has never seen the prompt could infer what it's about. You need to use synonyms for major nouns and verbs from the prompt, and be sure to mention any dates included in the prompt. I always tell everybody, make sure you establish time and place. If you don't, you won't get points in my class. Subthesis categories 1, 2, 3, 4 doesn't matter, but the bottom line is these subthesis categories will preview the organizational categories and help you organize your paper. We've gone over this with document and cap statements and whatnot, but we're grouping. It's the grouping for the first and second body paragraphs, and you have to add analysis by explaining how and why. It just can't be a list of things. It's got to be how and why in each of these sentences. That's what a lot of you lacked in what you submitted. So I'm going to go over some examples here shortly to try to help you. Obviously, you might have in this essay a subthesis category 3. You really wouldn't have a subthesis category 4. It could happen, but honestly, it's rare. Usually it's going to be 2 to 3. Some do's and don'ts. Don't simply reword the prompt. Okay, in terms of your thesis. That does not count. In addition to that, don't write the broad thesis without including the subthesis. All right, you got to have both if you're going to get the points. You'll see that when you get your papers back. Don't include too much factual evidence. Remember, you want to be efficient. Answer the question. Your factual evidence goes in your subthesis category paragraphs. Don't use self-reference. Don't use I, me, yins. Definitely don't use yins. But remember, don't use I. And again, my son's 5th grade book report, there was I all over it. I let it go. He's only 11. Don't write more than 5 sentences. All right? Again, you've got to make sure that you realize that time is of the essence. Get what you need to do for the thesis, get the point off of the rubric, and move on to contextualization. All right? 5 sentences, stop. Don't use slang or text abbreviations. I mean, that should go without saying. Hashtag, you know what I mean, and LOL. Anyway, you get the picture. Don't use present tense verbs. History's in the past. You can't act like it's happening as of right now. Okay? If you need help with that, stop and see me. All right? When you look at the prompt, we've talked about this, you need to look at each prompt and analyze what exactly are you trying to answer. So if you look at this prompt, we're enlightened despots, truly enlightened, you kind of have to think of it like this. On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad does it hurt? You may have heard that at the doctor. They want a pain tolerance or pain threshold. You may say 10, it's killing me. Or you might say, 1, not too bad. But this is the approach that you need to take for this prompt. All right? So usually, sometimes it's somewhere in the middle. When you talk about the 3 enlightened despots that we've mentioned, they kind of were different on a scale. And it's your scale. It doesn't have to be my scale. It's your scale, and you use your evidence when you write your paper to back it up. But you need to reflect this in your thesis. So I'm going to give you some examples. Here is one of your peers' thesis paragraphs. The surplus of changes that these rulers brought to their countries, sorry about the typo there. This is a live edit here. Prove that they were all enlightened despots. Each source lists many examples of evidence about what they believed in. This is further driven by what they accomplished in their years as a ruler. Okay, again, attempted to answer the question, but totally threw out the directions as to, the directives as to how I explained to you to write a valid and, definitive thesis. Let's take a look at the preview of organized categories. Look, we're supposed to go through this. Does it have a broad thesis that establishes time and place? I don't see one. It just kind of goes into that there were a bunch of changes and rulers brought to their countries to, here's the typo again, I apologize, prove that they were all enlightened despots. Doesn't mention Europe, doesn't mention Austria, doesn't mention Russia, none of that. So I would give them a 0 or a no for does it establish time and place in the broad thesis statement. Does it have 3 to 5 sentences? Check, yes. Okay, so there's it's not all bad. Does it contain 2 to 4 subthesis categories, organizational categories, or grouping for the main body paragraphs, and explain how and why? The answer to that, in my opinion, is no. So this wouldn't be a valid thesis. I don't think you'd get a point on the rubric, and that doesn't really do much for your grade on the AP exam. So let's take a look at this one. Several 18th century European rulers marked themselves as enlightened despots, captivating the ideals of the Enlightenment and inserting them into absolutism. Frederick the Great displayed these aspects with his reform acts and militaristic point of view. Joseph II's progressive nature paints him as one of the largest advocates of the Enlightenment. Catherine the Great's rule of Russia also aligned with these, similar to Frederick. Certainly, there's a broad thesis statement. There's, if you look, here's time, right? And here is place. So we're good there. Subthesis category 2, Frederick the Great. About Frederick the Great. Does it really put Frederick somewhere on a scale of like 1 to 10? It kind of just says he displayed these aspects with his reform acts and his militaristic point of view, which, though, I got to be honest, the reform acts and his militaristic view are kind of contradictory, right? Reform acts, sure, those are enlightened, but his militarism, not really all that enlightened. So I don't know that this really truly answers the question in regards to Freddie. Right? So I might have said, while Frederick implemented some modest enlightened reforms and granted more freedoms to some Prussians, his militaristic dependency on the aristocracy prevented him from being a legitimate enlightened ruler. So I'm kind of putting him on the scale that, while though he did make some reforms, he still was militaristic and dependent on the nobility. So I'm going to put him on the scale of 1 to 10, maybe a 5. Right? If you look at subthesis 2, it regards Joseph II, and again, the how and my must be addressed. This doesn't really indicate where Joseph is from, just so you know he's from Austria, and I'd probably place him the last of my subthesis categories and state that of all the enlightened monarchs, he was the truest and most sincere as he made his reforms without regard to the dependency on the nobility. Next, we have subthesis category 3 about Catherine the Great. And this one basically is saying Catherine was like Frederick, but does it have a how and why? All right, again, try to keep it on the scale in this type of prompt of a scale of 1 to 10. How enlightened was she? I might argue that Catherine the Great of Russia was likely the least of the enlightened despots, as internal turmoil regarding her ascendancy to the throne prevented her from making legitimate enlightened policies come to fruition. So you kind of get the idea of what you need to accomplish with the how and why with a few of the examples that I gave you. So what I'm going to allow you to do is have another shot at this. So take your thesis as I pass it back in class and revise it. If you choose to do this, I will add the two scores together, and I think this is fair. I'll give you the average, but we need to get better moving forward on this. So this is a good review. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Have a wonderful rest of the day or evening, whatever time of day it is. Go Eagles.